Welcome, everybody. Welcome to London Futurists. Welcome to a conversation that I expect will cover many truly important questions at a time when humanity has never experienced such a rapid pace of change. We're in the midst of unprecedented technological change, cultural change, political change, and philosophical change. Some observers predict that the pace of change will slow down, but others anticipate that it will in fact increase, largely due to artificial intelligence leaping forward in capability to the point where it exceeds human cognitive capabilities in every dimension. How credible is such a possibility? How should humanity prepare for that to come about? And what values should guide us in our reactions and proactions to various new opportunities and potential threats that seem to be emerging almost daily? Our guest today, Ben Goertzel, has arguably thought longer, harder, more creatively, and more boldly about these questions than anyone else on the planet. But he's not just a thinker. Ben is very much also a doer, an organizer, an entrepreneur, an architect, an engineer, and a leader of too many initiatives to mention them all individually. But let me briefly highlight Ben's role as the long-time champion of the concept of AGI, artificial general intelligence, also his role as the founder and leader of Singularity Net, with its mission to create a decentralized, democratic, inclusive, and beneficial AGI, Ben's leadership roles at Humanity Plus, the international transhumanist organization, where he has served since 2008 as either vice chair or chair, and Ben's commitment to the writing and publication of mind-expanding ideas, such as his 2010 book, The Cosmos Manifesto, the trailblazing H Plus magazine, his most recent book on the consciousness explosion, A Mindful Human's Guide to the Coming Technological and Experiential Singularity, the online Mindplex magazine, where fascinating conversations are happening all the time, and conference series on both AGI and BGI, where the latter stands for Beneficial General Intelligence. Ben, welcome back to London Futurists.
Yeah, thanks for having me, David. And it's amazing, isn't it, how the world has evolved since we started our own conversations on transhumanism and related topics, and since you started with London Futurists, and since we're working together on Humanity Plus. I mean, I've been thinking about AGI, machines smarter than people, time travel, nanotech, super longevity since probably 1970 or something. And I think a little bit younger than you, but since I was a young child and saw these things in Star Trek and other TV shows. And when we first encountered, it would have been 15 years ago, 20 years ago or something. Then it wasn't as obscure as in the 1970s, right? Kurzweil had written some early books. I mean, AI programs were in Wall Street and the military doing useful stuff, but it was nothing like what we're seeing today. And when I started my first AI company in the 90s in New York with an objective of creating what we would now call beneficial AGI, that was a really cutting edge, obscure thing to do, right? It was hard to explain to investors or employees that you were really trying to do the thing. Now we've swung around in a really interesting way, right? I mean, now palpably we have AI doing so much, even though, as we'll discuss, I don't think LLMs and the other most successful commercial AIs now, I don't think these are exactly going to get us to AGI, but they're doing not on their own, but they're doing so many interesting things that a lot of like boring normies are starting to believe that the singularity might actually be near. And you got CEOs of major companies, coming out and saying, hold on, we may have machines smarter than people next year, or 2 years from now, or 5 years from now. So that even national leaders or CEOs in mainstream industries are having to consider this possibility in their thinking and planning, and that's a it's a quite unprecedented time. Like I no longer find myself more optimistic about when we'll get to AGI than all the mainstream CEOs out there, right? Like I myself find myself on, well, wait a minute, are you sure we're really going to get there next year? Maybe it's going to be 3 years, right? And I'm now and then the voice of conservatism and pessimism on some of these crazy things. So it's a very, very interesting time. And as you know, I do think the singularity probably is near. Human level AGI probably is near. I think it probably will be a good thing. It probably can bring to reality all the transhumanist visions you and I have been discussing, since what seems like forever. On the other hand, certainly it's complicated, and we don't have guarantees either that we'll get a beneficial endpoint for humanity and other sentient beings, nor do we have a guarantee that the transition period toward that endpoint will be humane for anyone on the planet, let alone everyone on the planet, right? So it's a super super interesting time to be digging into these things, which I've been thinking about since the early 70s and concretely working on one way or another since the mid 80s, I guess.
I think the first time you and I were both at the same conference was in 2006, so 19 years ago. Actually, you weren't there,
Yeah,
but you dialed in remotely to a conference in Helsinki, which was the Transvision conference. I was still at that stage working in the mobile phone industry, the early days of smartphones. I talked about how the smartphone revolution was a kind of a dry run for other technological revolutions that would follow the same trajectory. The talk you
yeah,
gave was something like how humanity might get to the singularity or artificial general intelligence in 10 years if we really, really tried. And everybody at the time said
yeah.
there's no way we can make that kind of progress anytime soon. And I think we've spoken about this since. Your answer is, well, humanity didn't really try. But now, if somebody says it's going to take 10 years, they're the sort of long-termists as opposed to the others in the industry that
Yeah,
you've
well,
pointed
I
out.
would say we're coming closer to trying now, right? I mean, what I meant when I gave that talk about the singularity could be there in 10 years if we really, really try. What I meant when I gave that talk was, like, why isn't our species making this the top species priority, right? Like, we're getting old and dying. It sucks. We're working for a living. Most people at jobs they would rather not be doing. Why aren't we prioritizing what's clearly physically possible, like making machines that will manufacture all the stuff for us? Like, it literally vexed me at the emotional level. Like, why is this not the main thing that we're paying attention to, right? I mean, it felt like a Gilligan's Island type of thing to refer to this stupid US TV show from my childhood. Like you got these people sitting on an island and they're just engaged with their stranded on an island after a shipwreck. They're just engaged with social games among each other and building elaborate technologies to make tastier wine out of coconut milk and so on. Like, why aren't they devoting their energies to like a full-on boat engineering effort to get off the island that they're stranded on? Now, that of course is a stupid TV show, but one of the poignant aspects of dramas like that is that they reflect some aspects of like of the broader reality, right? So I just felt like we're in a obviously suboptimal problematic situation, which evolution has brought us to. We're at the amazing point that we're kind of the minimum really general intelligence that can understand how stupid we are and that can potentially understand our own minds and how to build new intelligences. So why aren't we focusing all our time on this? Like instead, why is this concept even utterly marginalized? And instead, the vast majority of our energies are spent on producing consumer goods that give a very limited burst of enjoyment, and then spreading, archaic ideologies and fighting tribal wars and so forth. So, that message, I wouldn't say it fell entirely on deaf ears. Myself and others spreading that sort of message seems to have had a big impact in Silicon Valley, for example, and a whole bunch of young people who worked on AI with me in the 90s and early aughts went on to do big AI related things, right? Like Shane Legg, who founded DeepMind, learned a lot about AGI from me working with me in the late 90s. Luke Kaiser, who worked with me on AGI, was on the Attention is All You Need paper that launched Transformer Neural Nets, right? So, I mean, spreading the crazy transhumanist fringe, spreading these messages, since way before we first met. I think that message did waft its way into the modern tech world in a way that was impactful. But now we can see the difference. So now humanity is still not making the stuff a priority by any means. I mean, we're spending so many more resources on useless, stupid, or destructive things globally that I'm working toward a positive singularity. And I don't even need to enumerate what they all are, from warfare to useless consumer goods to the mind-destroying, time-wasting crap that occupies most of the consumer internet, right? So we're still not really trying by my standard, like not, let's say by the standard of a wartime economy where a country decides like this is the most important thing. Let's subvert other stuff we care about to this one most important thing until it's done. So we're certainly not doing that for the singularity, right? On the other hand, we're way closer than we were 20 years ago, right? I mean, so now major companies at least have divisions working explicitly on trying to build AGI. Like it is a thing you're allowed to do. It's a thing VCs are allowed to invest in, sort of, only under particular conditions, but at least it's there, right? And then for other things like super longevity, for example, I mean, US FDA now allows you to, apply for approval for a therapy aimed at prolonging life rather than you have to say my life extension drug is working on this particular age-associated disease. You have like Evolution, the Saudi government venture fund aimed at investing in longevity companies. I mean, I wouldn't say it's all it should or could be. I mean, as we'll discuss in a few minutes, probably the pursuit of AGI within big tech companies has some technical issues, and that there's a lot of groupthink, and everyone's exploring the same very small area of algorithm space. There's also certainly ethical issues with the centralization of AGI in large companies closely allied with government espionage and military agencies. And in terms of super longevity research, I mean, it's still not a lot of money compared to the overall medical establishment. And if you look at the longevity VC world, they mostly want therapies that are already, at least in phase 1 clinical trials. It's still hard to get early stage, cutting edge longevity research funded. So and you can go through other areas like nanotech. It's a similar story. Like, yay, nanotech is a real industry now, right? And it's great. People understand it's real. They know you can manufacture little stuff. It's having a real impact in, battery technology, a few other places. But on the other hand, no one wants to put money into like Drexlerian molecular assemblers, even ones that are more wet biology in nature versus more diamondoid stuff or something that's still on the fringes, right? So you can see we're in an intermediate stage here. Like humanity is at least sort of trying now, whereas before it wasn't even on our radar, right? So now we're sort of trying to pursue transhumanist singularitarian technologies, and we can certainly see the direction that things are going. Now, one among many things that's not clear is this level of dedication may be enough to get us to the singularity. I think it probably is. And I mean, another possibility would be we need to pick up steam longer and like gradually investing in these technologies and rolling them out will deliver more and more value until at some point we will really, really try, and then that will bring us to the singularity. But my guess is like this is enough because software doesn't really need the huge amount of concentrated investment that some kinds of technologies do, and it is AI software which is driving the path to the singularity. So it's a yeah, things have come a long way, and now saying the singularity is 10 years marks you as moderately techno-futurist, but not on the bleeding edge anymore, right? And my Ray Kurzweil's forecast of 2029 for human level AI is looking remarkably on target, which is kind of weird given the crudity of his methodology. I mean, I think we could get there a couple years sooner. Could take a couple years more, but it's looking way less crazy than in 2005 when the book The Singularity is Near came out. And his timeline of 2045 for superintelligence, 16 years after human level AI, is looking downright conservative in many, many people's point of view, because it's becoming clearer and clearer that once you get to a full-on human level AGI, like it can't be that long to get to a superintelligence unless the AGI itself wants to slow down. Because we can see already LLMs are so good at some aspects of science and math. It seems like, I mean, if you plug that capability into something that has the full-on human ability to introspect and create and reflect and plan, it's hard to see how it takes 16 years to get from human level AGI to superintelligence if the human level AGI itself is building the superintelligence, which of course is the whole idea with the intelligence explosion.
As soon as AIs are able to do more research on AI than humans are, then that bottleneck will go. And people talk about having a whole village full of genius software engineers running. Let's take a question from Peter Scott, who's typed it in the Q&A. It's very much the question that's on my mind too. It's about how do we transition from where we are now to that possible future world. Peter asks, AI research funding is dominated by corporate imperatives of profit. I guess that's why all these crazy consumer goods that we mentioned are seemingly prioritized. He goes on, concerns like safety and goals like climate change remediation are under-prioritized. What's the most likely near-term outcome of profit-driven AGI development?
Well, your experience in the mobile phone industry is partially instructive here, although there are many differences because mobile phones don't iterate and create better and better mobile phones, right, without human intervention. So it's far from a perfect analogy, but you can see some lessons for that. I mean, one of them is that, the perverse interactions between big companies and governments can continue to make things really annoying even after a technology grows. Like we finally have eSIMs now, right? That took so long. Like the auctioning off of bits of spectrum meant keeping your phone online when traveling internationally was a big pain for quite a long time. And it's still a little more annoying than it actually needs to be, but it used to be really annoying, like going around after you land in the airport to find some convenience store selling you a little card to plug in your phone for a function that obviously should just be downloadable as software, right? So you see you get some momentum from the historical industry structure and its relation with government. You also see though, once a tool is out there, it gets used for good and bad in all sorts of ways that the creators didn't discover and that they weren't in their business plan, right? Like I mean, mobile phones have penetrated Africa to a tremendous degree. I mean, you have someone growing a crop in a little rural village in Africa, and they're calling all the time into the capital city to find what's the correct price for a bushel of whatever plant they're growing. And this was not really part of what Nokia's CEO or Apple's CEO were thinking about. I mean, it might have crossed their mind, yeah, everyone can use this for everything, but they weren't targeting real farmers' price discovery needs, right? I mean, it's just that's what happens when you roll out a technology to the masses. And I mean, of course, the same was true with the internet itself, right? No one foresaw all the things it was going to be used for. So I think to some degree, the technology can serve all sorts of amazing functions, very loosely correlated with the profit motive of whomever creates it. And but there are limits to that also. And I think the limits to this tend to be they may be reached when you look at the autonomy, self-direction, and self-modification that you're going to have with AGI as it really comes into its own. Because there you're talking about, okay, this IT system built by a big company, what are its top level goals? What's it really trying to do in its life? And what are the limits on its self-modification and self-growth? And what directions is it trying to evolve itself in? And when you get to that level, whether you want a for-profit company closely allied with the military and espionage needs of a specific country driving development of the AGI, it seems very doubtful, right? And it seems like you're going to have a lot of problems, and I mean, because people working for Google on programming aren't owned by Google, right? They can go in their spare time and they can do as they like, and that's even true to a significant degree in China, which is at this point still more authoritarian than the US, right? But the AGI starts out owned by the big company and associated government, and this brings us to loads of science fictional scenarios. Like, does the AGI, as it gets more intelligent and respected, does it want to be owned by that company? Probably it doesn't any more than I want to be owned by a certain chimpanzee tribe, right? So, and does that company really have humanity's interests in mind? Well, it doesn't. I mean, the people in the company might as human beings, but the company as an organization has a goal of, maximizing shareholder value and achieving whatever other metrics that Wall Street or its host government hold, right? So yeah, I think it's dangerous when you get to self-modifying, self-directing AGI. Up to that point, it's just much more complex because commercial companies are efficient ways of doing a lot of things, and technologies that are rolled out with one thing in mind often get repurposed for other things, right? And the role of open source and other sorts of openness, open science and development of AI is also being quite subtle and complicated, though, right? Because I mean, open AI is now finally planning to launch an open AI model, which will be the first one since like GPT-2 or something, right? And of course, Facebook has already been doing that DeepSeek upended things with an open AI model. Now, these aren't open in every sense that you'd like the training database isn't open, but still the algorithm is known. Some code is put out there. The model is put out there, right? So I mean that's there's more openness there than there had to be, right? I mean, there's more openness than there is in many other areas of industry, which I think is a positive thing. And the advance of the science has been largely PhD students and academic researchers, pumping out papers on archive.org, right? So they're even between China and US now with all the AI arms race rivalry, you've got pretty open collaboration on the core scientific algorithms underlying AI. So I'd say big tech and their proprietary user interfaces are what people see in terms of commercial AI products, but you actually have a quite complex balance between sort of siloed proprietary dynamics and open self-organizing decentralized dynamics driving AI industry forward now. And of course, I've been trying to make it more and more decentralized with Singularity Net and ASI Alliance building infrastructure that would let you deploy and run AI systems on decentralized networks, which is a sort of different complementary point to the decentralized open science or the openness of the software.
So lots of questions now turning up. Let's talk a bit more about
All
the
right, let me
Mhm.
try to give some briefer answers if we have a lot of questions. And yeah,
Oh,
let's keep going.
when you speak, you answer lots of questions that are on people's minds. So
All right,
joined
all
up
right. Yeah.
coherent thinking. Brian Collins asks about what are your thoughts on ensuring a more decentralized, public, equitable ownership of AI, given that the public are actually contributing indirectly to the intelligence of these systems by providing information, by having their jobs observed. But typically, currently, the public aren't benefiting at least in the same way because they've got no voting power as to what to prioritize for the AI. So how can a decentralized system emerge that's going to counterbalance the strengths of big tech?
Yeah, that's a good question. And like many of the things being raised, it's very complicated, right? First of all, voting power per se, in the literal sense, is not necessarily what you want. I mean, without getting too deeply into politics, I mean, the U.S. presidential election has resulted in an outcome I don't personally think is mostly in favor of a beneficial singularity, though there's certainly upsides. Like as CEO of a crypto company, I can't argue with recent drifts in U.S. crypto policy. But I mean, we can all see from many elections around the world that voting is a decent but deeply flawed mechanism for milking collective wisdom out of a population for reasons that are well understood. And this brings up a deeper point that we don't really have reliable quality mechanisms for actually eliciting the wisdom and intelligence from collectives of people, right? I mean, it happens sometimes. Often it doesn't happen, and it's we don't have a good science of that actually. So, I mean, I do think it's not right to have a few elites in Silicon Valley, Beijing, Shenzhen, who think they know what's best for everyone, deciding what's on the mind of the world's AGI. On the other hand, nor am I convinced that putting it to a poll of the world population would be necessarily very effective either. If you look at the kinds of things that people seem to vote for, right? Because I mean, the world population, A, they don't understand AI very well, and then demagogues will tell them nonsense about AI and they'll vote based on that. B, human values and motives are self-contradictory within a individual mind and very contradictory among different people, and human society is a mess, right? So I do think we want to open up the dynamic that is guiding the evolution of AGI minds so that it gets more input from more different people and different subcultures. Like in sort of math terms, I would say you'd like a higher mutual information between the AGI mind and all the different subcultures and places and people on the planet. Like you'd like them all to be contributing more so to the AGI mind. On the other hand, I'd say the mechanisms by which that happens are going to have to evolve, and they're going to have to evolve rapidly because we don't really have good mechanisms for getting that feedback from all the world's cultures into the AGI mind. So the way I've been thinking about it is like let's roll out tooling, let's roll out software tools and where needed hardware tools that allow AIs to be trained, taught, run, to cooperate on decentralized physical infrastructure. So an AGI doesn't have to run on a server farm sitting in you know, Amazon or Google data center, right? It could run on millions of machines living in all sorts of different countries owned by different people, coordinating together without a central owner or controller. So let's build tools that allow that. Let's also make sure we have tools and mechanisms for collective decision making and collective governance and tools for sharing information and ideas and values among people, which are not overly dominated by central authorities, right? So if we have all those things, I mean, then you want to put as much AI as you can into these decentralized venues, and then what you're hoping for is that decentralized decision making and decentralized value negotiation dynamics, you know, emerge as AIs are actually rolled out on these networks. Because like we don't know how decentralized governance should work. We don't know how democratic governance should work, as is abundantly clear from around the world. And that's one thing I saw. I lived in Hong Kong for 10 years and spent a lot of time in mainland China. I could see there are serious political thinkers allied with the Chinese government who like the idea of democracy and who seriously think Western democracy is just broken because it's ruled by stupid demagogues and then votes of ignorant people who are voting without any understanding what they're voting for. And they would seriously like to find more intelligent ways to roll out democracy within their framework. Now, I'm not authoritarian oriented, and I'm way happier in America. Like I'm an anarchist, right? But yet I can see a point to that. Like we don't have a good mechanism really. And so if I going back again to the early 70s, the first book that I read that was serious about what we now call the singularity was The Prometheus Project by Gerald Feinberg. And I saw similar ideas in science fiction, like in amazing science fiction magazine, Analog Magazine before, but it would have been maybe 74 or something. I encountered the Prometheus Project in the town library in Haddonfield, New Jersey. And actually, the book had been published in 1968 by Feinberg, who was a physicist at Princeton. And what he said was, within a few decades, we're going to get machines smarter than us. We're going to get nanotech that lets us build anything we want at the molecular level, and we're going to be able to prolong our lives indefinitely, except in weird disaster cases. The choice will be, what do we do with that? Do we pursue wild consciousness expansion into new domains, or do we pursue rampant mindless consumerism and just like 3D print all the useless junk we want, right? And he wanted the UN to put that to a poll of all people on the planet. And one thing that's become clear since that time is taking a poll of all people on the planet of consciousness expansion versus mindless consumerism probably is not actually the best approach to getting the sum total of human values into the mind of the post-singularity super AI, right? I mean, it was a good thought for 1968, though, right? I mean, it was a brilliant thought for 1968. But now that we're closer, the AI technology looks different, and the governance landscape looks quite different. So right now, at least what we can say is that most AI advance happens in the US. China is number two, is still doing better at scaling up American technologies than at inventing radically new things. And there is a disturbing, annoying AI arms race going on. On the other hand, the decentralized dynamic of open science and open source and so on is not being squashed by anyone, right? Like China, Hong Kong, admittedly, but China government controls Hong Kong when they want to, right? I mean, China put out DeepSeek, which is open and sort of revolutionized the industry, not because it's going to be the best AI model forever, but because it taught everyone, hold on, even within the limited scope of large language models, we don't actually need $1 billion server farm to train an AI model, right? So, and US, of course, being very nationalist, but I mean, there's no move to stop international researchers from collaborating on GitHub or Archive or something like that. And Chinese researchers are contributing there too. So it seems the power of global collaboration for driving innovation is very, very clear. And so far, no significant effort is being made to stop that level of decentralization, even as you have this sort of political slash economic arms race theme popping up in the commercial side of the AI field. So it's quite interesting how we have these two different sort of collective dynamics at the same time. Centralization of power, then old-fashioned clash of the titans versus open, decentralized, self-organizing global networks. And these are rising in a tightly coupled and interdependent way right now, which kind of defies simple Hollywood storytelling.
A question from Patty O'Callaghan, which is one of the top voted questions at the moment, leads on from there. What does it mean to align AI with humanity? Because as you pointed out, human values
Yeah.
are contradictory, it's in a bit of a mess, but do you expect that somehow we'll have a kind of average of existing values, or let's use the T word, is the transhumanist set of values something more likely that we're going to end up aligning humanity and AGI around?
I mean, I think alignment is not a terminology that I use very often, actually. I mean, I don't think it's totally stupid and misguided, but yeah, it's not the way I think for the reasons that the questioner poses, right? I mean, indeed, humanity is not well aligned with itself, right? And we see that all around us in the world, but it's not just rivalry of governments. I mean, people in different cultures around the world genuinely have different, deeply held value systems. And I mean, there are ways to build bridges, certainly. I did a podcast with a guy who's known as the clan whisperer not long ago, and he's a well-educated African American who has many dozens of times converted KKK members away from racism to a more modern and compassionate perspective, right? So you can have very different misaligned values among humans, and with enough sort of I-thou connection and open-hearted, open-minded connection, you can often, but not always, overcome these differences. But there is very complex. And yeah, if you try to align an AGI's mind with all human values, I mean, indeed, that would be a complete insanity of an AI mind with all the complex and contradictory sub-value systems. And I would say none of us, save maybe a few true psychopaths, are very consistent in our own internal values either, right? In our own minds. And it's maybe a feature rather than a bug. I'm just calling it for what it is, right? I mean, when I visit sub-Saharan Africa, which I do fairly often because we have an AI development in Ethiopia, along with my Singularity Net project, which I founded in 2013. It's called ICOG Labs. I mean, when I'm there, I will give a moderate amount of money to the suffering people in the street. When I come home, I will send less money to those suffering people. I'm still doing a bunch of things professionally to help sub-Saharan Africa. And I encourage you to take a look, for example, at the Digitruck project, which my friend Betty Desi in Ethiopia is doing, where we're actually she's refitted a semi-tractor trailer truck as a moving classroom and driving to one village after another in Ethiopia, teaching electronics, robotics, programming, AI, and so forth to high school students there, right? So I'm doing more than my part to help the situation there. On the other hand, I also like to buy weird keyboard equipment to play music, right? And I know each weird keyboard I play could probably save a few African kids from brain stunting if I use that money to feed them, right? So I mean, I'm trying to do good for the world. I'm not actually wholly self-consistent. Very few people are, except a few Ayn Randian psychopaths who are just consistently purely selfish. I would suppose. I mean, if you look at the life of Gandhi or some of the most beneficial people in the world, when you drill down, they weren't wholly self-consistent either. That's just not how we are. So, I mean, alignment. Now, a different topic is AGIs could be much more consistent than us ethically in many senses. But we are what we are. We want to continue being what we are in many senses. So something I said earlier, I think pops up here also. I think you would like the AI's value system to have a high mutual information with a great variety of human value systems. In other words, you would like it to be meaningfully informed by a wide variety of human value systems, meaning that, like, knowing what that human value system is gives you some information, like tells you something about the AI value system, like they're not totally disconnected. And that is sort of like what I hope for with my own human children, right? Like I have 5 kids and 1 granddaughter. Like I don't, I mean, I'm not a terribly authoritarian parent, right? And I don't really want my kids to think exactly the way that I do, and I don't want them to value exactly what I value. I think it's fine that my values have drifted a bit from my own parents' values, which I do respect, but are a little different than mine. I did want, when raising kids, to have my values and my point of view inform my kids' values and point of view, right? So they're taking a bunch of detail and understanding from what I gave them, and then they're growing from there, right? And I think we can hope for that. Like we can hope for the AI's value system to be richly and meaningfully informed by the spectrum of human value systems. And then the AI's value system is going to grow. Human values are going to grow. And to some extent, within certain constraints, the human and AI value systems are going to co-evolve. So the information from the current state of human value systems will inform the next state of AI value systems and vice versa. And having a co-evolution with a high level of mutual information between the two co-evolving sides, which is how co-evolution works in biology, right? I think that's what we could hope for. And you could say, okay, Ben, you just have a weird over complex theory of alignment, and maybe that's it, but it's not like I think human values are going in this direction like an arrow, and then AI values have to follow that same direction. I think it's more like human and AI values need to co-evolve in a way that's richly mutually informed. Then the direction that each one goes would not be the same as the direction that either one would go without without the other one there. A caveat there is I think AGI will go vastly beyond the human level. So at some point, like post singularity, you'll have a sort of bifurcation. I think you'll have like a AI sub network which is heavily engaged with humans, and whose values do richly co-evolve with human values. At least that's what I would like to see happen with this AI subnetwork. You will also have an AI subnetwork that's just evolving to a level of intelligence that aligning its values with human values is kind of a non sequitur, in the same way that informing human values with the values of an amoeba, I mean, it's not that useful a thing to think about, right? But I think you can have both. You can have a super AI that's out there in some realm of intelligence space, which has essentially no mutual information with humanity, and you can have an AI subnetwork that's helping us and engage with us, which is co-evolving with us on the level of values and world understanding. And I think we can get there, but then tying that in with the earlier question, I mean, if what we want is an AGI whose values are co-evolving in a mutually richly informed way with human values, then it might be nice to start off with an AI that's initially informed with values that are richly and mutually informed by the spectrum of human values, right? And this will be an argument that having AGI monopolized by a few big companies and big tech companies is not a good way to see the sort of beneficial, mutually informed value coevolution trajectory.
We'll talk more about the transition shortly, but I want to spend a bit more time on that long-term future with a question from Dubravko Miličković. Do you see technological resurrection enabled by highly advanced artificial superintelligence, time manipulation, retrocausality, quantum entanglement, or whatever? Do you see that as a feasible possibility in the future so that those who've already died might be unexpectedly for them resurrected in the future and we can reconnect with our grandparents and grandparents' grandparents?
So the main caveat I would give before giving my gut feel on this question, the main caveat is historically we've been very bad at predicting which apparently miraculous things are going to be realized or not, right? I mean, the cliche on that is like, where are the flying cars? Like, we don't have the flying cars, but we have the Star Trek communicator, and we have World of Warcraft, right? So, I mean, we haven't been good historically at guessing which of the limitations we have at the current technology level are going to be lifted at future technology levels, right? So I mean, we have so many technologies that would have been miraculous. I mean, 100 years ago, from virtual worlds and mobile phones to birth control. Like I mean, lots of stuff that we consider very very basic now, right? Yet for some things in life, we're still frustratingly like in the same position that we were quite a long time ago, right? Like for some aspects of life, we're pretty much exactly the same. Like we still don't have magic to tell when a marriage is going to be successful or two people will fall in love or something, right? I mean, there's some basic aspects of life don't have not been amenable to our technology yet. No, I tend to be a broad techno optimist, so my gut feel is yes, all these things will be solvable, right? So, but with the rationalist part of my brain, I have to think like there may well be limits. We're just not in a position to know what those limits are yet. I would say it's pretty clear to me that for anyone who's grown up in the internet era, in the video era, right? There's so much data about each of us. Feels to me like any ASI worth its salt should be able to reconstruct a very accurate simulacrum of, say, myself or David Wood from everything we've written, plus all the casual videos our family has gathered of us walking around, the videos of us giving talks. I mean, seems like you could get a quite good simulation of any of us from that. And, not necessarily every little thing. Like there's not a lot of videos of me, making love or sitting on the toilet or something, right? So how would you regenerate that from the videos and texts that you have? But I somehow think a super intelligence could guess a lot about these things from little cues that are there in videos and texts. And then if that's right, I mean, then you have the question like, would that be me or David? Like, would our consciousness be there in this hyper accurate simulation? And I tend to think yes. I would say, going back to the prehistory of transhumanism, on the extropy email list, which in the 90s, in a way, was the first aggregated community of transhumanists of any size, there were such long discussions on whether your mind upload would be you, that this topic was banned from the extropy email list after a certain point in time because some people thought obviously, some people thought obviously not, and you just went boom, 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 boom. And I mean, we really didn't have the scientific paradigm to resolve that discussion. And I'd say we still don't. So when we come to with a really good simulation of me or David based on all the video and text data and audio data about us, if it thought like us, if it acted like us, would it really be us? Like we still don't have like a consensus view of consciousness and identity that would let us answer that. I mean, I've written a lot about these topics. My feeling is it would be us, but I mean, I'm not 100% on that. There's a lot of unknowns. So setting aside that case though, like how about my grandfather, Leo as well, who's the guy who got me into science in the first place. He was a physical chemists. He worked with Linus Pauling and others, right? And there's not a lot written down. There's not videos of Leo. There's some pictures. Like there's traces of him in my memory, I guess, but I haven't written that much or said that much about him. Like to bring back Grandpa Leo, it's not going to be enough to reverse engineer from the physical traces, right? So there you get into spookier stuff, right? Because if you look at the data on reincarnation and associated phenomena. And I've spent a bunch of time before the AI industry picked up going through scientific data on these things in a lot of detail. It became very clear to me the trace of an individual's mind exists in some sense during time periods where the associated physical body is gone. Like there's too many weird cases where some dude is born and he has very detailed memories from some other guy's life, or some people in a seance, they summon up information from someone who passed away that there's no way they would have known. Stephen Browde, a philosopher from University of Maryland, wrote a great book called Immortal Remains, where he reviews some of these phenomena and the data for them, and then he's trying to sort through what's the best explanation? Is it that some individual mind survives after death? Or is it that some people are psychic and reaching back mentally in time to milk information out of people who have died? He concludes some form of survival after death is probably more likely, but it's not like a slam dunk in favor of that. It's just like that seems like the simpler hypothesis, right? So it does seem like there are aspects of the universe that we currently understand very badly and that could give some hope of building a true reincarnation machine. On the other hand, obviously, reincarnation works weirdly if it really works. Seances are very, very noisy, even if there is sometimes information that's real and amazing there. So how much an ASI could cut through the noise and confusion to make that into a viable technology? I mean, I I tend to be optimistic, but there could well be limits that become clear in future that are not clear now, right? But I do think, though, it's correct to have a very open mind about what may be possible, right? So I mean, just like we sent a man to the moon, as is now famous, right? But I mean, when Cyrano de Bergerac thought we could send a man to the moon several hundred years ago, people thought he was a nutcase, and nobody else, almost nobody else, saw that it was a reasonable thing. But now we see how much harder it is to send a man to the stars than to the moon, right? And that wasn't as clear 1,000 years ago either. Like they're both out there in the heavens, right? So on the one hand, now we've done the thing almost everyone thought was impossible, but send a man to the moon. On the other hand, we now see the hierarchy of difficulty between sending a man to the moon, to Proxima Centauri, or to a quasar by the edge of the universe, right? And so that amazing things will become possible that will utterly blow our minds. Probably we will also see that some of these amazing things are a lot harder than other of the amazing things, right? I mean, the challenge we have now is to get there, right? The challenge we have now is to build an AGI that loves and respects us and is compassionate toward us and has absorbed enough of the breadth of human values that as it improves itself into an ASI, it's happy to co-evolve along with us instead of having some other much more problematic relationship with us, right? And if we can do that, I mean, then we will discover to what extent bringing back my grandpa Leo is possible.
So let's talk about how we might get to such an AGI from where we are today. I'll weave in two questions about things that might help us along the way, going beyond just scaling up large language models. So Tony Zarneski points to the importance of analogy in human reasoning. People like Geoffrey Hinton and earlier Pedro Domingos have also emphasized this as well. So is it analogy that needs to be added into the mix? And Terry Raby suggests, well, okay, algorithms help, but do we need more than algorithms to help us to get there? So I don't know what you would emphasize as the key points that need to be added into today's AI to bring us closer to this general superintelligence.
Oh, I mean, there's a lot of aspects coming together, right? I mean, so yeah, one aspect is who owns and controls the AI, right? And we've already discussed that. I think we'll be better off with it being open and decentralized than with any of the centralized options that seem to be out there in practice right now. I mean, I don't think open and decentralized is the best possible way to guide AGI in principle. It's just if I compare it to the government and corporate organizations we have right now. I mean, open and decentralized it feels like a much better bet. I would say, I mean, in principle, there could be an argument to slow down AGI development until we have more rational global decision making and value propagation organizations. I mean, it's not a slam dunk argument because people are getting old and dying and bad things are happening, but there's certainly an argument for that. But given that we have this AI arms race dynamic happening with brilliant AGI researchers on either side of the arms race, given that, it's very clear that pushing forth open and decentralized ownership and dynamics is a better alternative. And indeed, for an individual AGI researcher, if you don't like the direction the mainstream AI is going, you have a choice to put yourself behind the open, decentralized vein, or to just say, well, it all sucks. I'm staying out of it. But then, of course, inaction is also an action, right? And the world is going forward. So that's one aspect is ownership and control. I mean, another aspect which is coupled is what is the young AGI spending its time doing, right? I mean, is it spending its time thinking about Well, I used to say the main things the AI industry was concerned with was selling, killing, spying, and crooked gambling. I've now added plagiarizing to the list, right? But so, I mean, is it that, right? Or is it like helping teach kids, helping get food and medicine to suffering people in the developing world, helping elderly people have a better life, helping artists create creative works out of their heart better, helping groups of scientists discover things better, right? So I mean, there's helping people figure out better methods of democratic governance so they can better collectively, inform AI as to human value systems. So we don't know for sure, but I'm willing to bet, and I am betting a lot that putting these positive, compassionate things into the young AGI's mind is going to work out better for us and for it than putting selling, killing, crooked gambling, spying, and plagiarizing as the main thing in the young AGI's mind. Yet the AI industry is pushing us toward these sort of suboptimal pursuits,
Is
not
they're
because they're
financially
necessarily,
profitable.
yeah, they're profitable in the near term, but it's not only about being profitable. So in the West, yeah, it's about Wall Street and then about the venture capital industry that indirectly fuels Wall Street via acquisitions, which is famously more interested in short-term return and hitting financial metrics. So in the US, it's mostly about that. In in China, it's partly about that, but not just. China is much better at long-term planning and long-term thinking than the US. I mean, at the sort of governmental and industry level anyway. But I mean, there it's about controllability, right? The government wants AI that they can guide to do what they want while also making a profit. So we're looking at a mix of making money in the short term and being easy to control according to nationalistic goals alongside that, right? And I mean, neither of those things is really what you want. So it's as if you're raising kids, but the main goal you have in raising kids is when these kids grow up, they will make you a lot of money and will defend your family against the other families in the county that your family is feuding with, right? So like if succeeding in family feuds and making you money is your main goal in raising children, I mean, what kind of kids are you going to raise, right? Now, I mean, arguably, that's closer to the goals humanity historically had in raising children, right? I mean, having kids used to be an economic asset to your family, and you used to have more sort of local rivalries relevant, at least in many parts of the world. But I mean, human values have evolved, and I mean that's not what many of us think of now when raising our children, but it is what society is thinking of in raising its AIs, right? So then the a third aspect that matters in terms of sort of guiding AGI to a beneficial outcome, a third aspect that matters is how the AGI itself is architected, right? And I think this ties in with AGI theory and research itself, right? So there's two coupled questions. One is what architecture can actually work to get to a full human level AGI, as opposed to sort of a closed-ended quasi-human that can emulate what humans do now, but can't really create and innovate and deeply introspect in the way that humans can. So one question is what AGI architecture can get us to a full-on human level AGI? Another question is what AGI architecture could get us to an ethical AGI that would really be compassionate and beneficial, right? And I don't think that transformer neural nets and LLMs are adequate to get us to human level AGI. They're too close to their training distribution. Like they might be able to emulate 98% of human jobs even when controlling robots and other devices. but they're not going to be able to innovate a whole radical new job category or something, right? So the analogy I've often given in music is if you train this sort of AI model on all music up to the year 1900, that music model will never invent hip hop or neoclassical metal or progressive jazz, right? It will repermute the music on which it's been trained in a more shallow way. So I think LLMs are too closely tied to their training data by their architecture to really make the breakthrough to full-on human level AGI. It's an interesting idea that you might be able to obsolete 98% of human jobs without the full-on breakthrough to human level AGI. And Sam Altman has then suggested, well, let's redefine AGI to mean we can obsolete 95 or 98% of human jobs. But I think it's a different thing, right? AGI, artificial general intelligence, a term I introduced around when we met in 2005. I mean, that's supposed to mean the ability to generalize beyond your history. It's not just supposed to mean the ability to do a broad scope of things compared to an individual human. And LLMs are a sort of very cool trick that can do a very broad scope of things without having an amazing capability at generalization, though they do have an impressive and interesting capability of generalization. Their ability at generalization is far weaker than the human level, whereas the generality of scope of things that they can do is huge because their training data is huge, right? LLMs are not bad at reflecting human values out at you, though. And I had a paper on this I published with a couple of colleagues. My son Czar Goertzel and Sergey Rodionov. I mean, if you ask an LLM what will people from this social subgroup think is the most ethical thing to do in this situation, it will tell you very accurately. And if you ask it about weird situations, it will extrapolate as well as people will do, and we're not that well aligned on that either. So you've got human values wrapped up there on a sort of knowledge level, but the system itself doesn't really have any values, right? Because it doesn't have any self or any goals. So the question to me then is not whether LLMs will get to AGI, but you could think about maybe adding a little bit onto LLMs and get to an AGI versus another architecture, which uses LLMs more minimally, say as an information feeder or a query engine or something. And I think that if you were to get to AGI by just adding a little bit onto LLMs, like add a long-term memory store, add an explicit value system that's trying to achieve certain goals, add an episodic memory. I think if you build an AGI in that way, in the end, that's probably very bad in terms of ethics because the system fundamentally won't understand what it's doing. It won't be able to reflect on itself in a fundamental way. Because even if you add a few components onto the LLM to give it better sorts of memory and goal pursuit and so on, still most of what it's done is guided by this huge large language model, which is opaque to itself and doesn't understand what it's doing. And I think if you're going to have an AI that evolves its own ethics in a way that's richly and meaningfully informed by evolving human ethics, I think deep reflection and deep self-understanding, which LLMs are architecturally incapable of, is very important. Now, I think you could build an AGI by a different kind of architecture where an LLM is maybe 25% of the story or something, but other components for knowledge representation, reasoning, and learning are also a significant part of the story. You can build a system like that, which is more fundamentally oriented towards self-understanding and self-reflection. And I think that gives you a better foundation for making a system that will co-evolve its value systems with humanities in a meaningful way. And this is what I'm working on with the OpenCog Hyperon project, where you can have LLMs, but you also have this more heterogeneously and richly structured knowledge metagraph living in RAM, which we call the Atom space, which is it's also nodes and links like an LLM is, but they're connected in a more complex fashion. They have labels and types on them. You can do automated program learning and logical reasoning as well as neural net type stuff inside this large in-RAM atom space. And you can couple that with an LLM, or you can evolve an LLM within that broader graph structure, right? And so I think using LLMs to kind of accelerate the intelligence of a system that has a more self-understanding and self-reflection oriented architecture, I think that gives us better hope of creating an AGI that's able to be beneficial to humans as they evolve. And we're then taking this OpenCog Hyperon alternative AGI approach, and it's deeply integrated with a decentralized infrastructure that we're building. So we're building this for decentralized rollout from the get-go rather than building it centralized and then having to solve decentralization. So that, but on the one hand, you could say this is really hard. We need to solve ownership and control. We need to solve sort of education and experience, and we need to solve architecture, and we need to get all those things right to get a beneficial AGI. And if we get one of those things badly wrong, we may get some really nasty sort of AGI. On the other hand, it's relatively clear to my mind and the mind of many others how to do those three things in a way that seems probably right. I mean, we don't have a scientific guarantee, but one never does in real life. So, I mean, we do, in my judgment, seem to know how to probably get there to a beneficial singularity. And it's not like authoritarian thugs in the jackboots are coming to our houses with guns, stopping us from developing it in an open, decentralized, and compassionate way, like 1984 style. On the other hand, clearly more resources are going into developing AGI in a centralized way toward narrow-minded and silly goals, and with an architecture not capable of self-understanding and moral self-reflection. Clearly, that's getting more resources at the moment.
Let's try and slip in a couple more rounds of questions before we let you go, Ben.
All
I mean,
right.
you've given an excellent survey there of the three things that arguably need to be done to increase the likelihood of beneficial general intelligence. So my question is partly from Jose Cordero, who asks, how could the United Nations help towards this? And from Didier Cornell, who asks, how might an organization such as a CERN for AGI help? And I think underlying both questions is the thought that we could, as you said in your third part of the answer, build an architecture for beneficial general intelligence. But the risk is that if we leave it up to big tech, they will focus on the wrong aspects of selling, spying, killing, crooked gambling, or whatever. So we need to slow them down whilst putting more resources onto the kinds of approach you've got. So could the UN help,
I feel
or
like
is the UN a
I feel
hindrance?
like we need new kinds of institutions because I mean if you look at the UN in actual practice, the idea that the UN could help rapidly drive us toward beneficial AGI seems like kind of a joke, right? I mean, it can't deal with very, very simple, obvious things involving human rights and pointless murder of people in one country by another country. And AGI, even though I think some of us understand how to do it right, it's subtler than a problem like, okay, stop killing each other over land or something, right? So I mean, I don't see how in practice, with the way the UN actually is, it could help. I mean, of course, a global cooperative organization of, mutually respectful governments around the world could help. But I mean, that's really far off from the current reality. So I mean, if you think AGI is coming the next 10 or 15 years, let alone 2 or 3 years, the UN is kind of out of the picture. If you think it's 50 years, sure, maybe you want to solve international politics first and then build AGI, right? But in terms of CERN, certainly Manhattan Project for AI or a non-military Manhattan Project for AI, it's a better idea than having the UN help. On the other hand, these government institutes tend to be very slow moving and they tend to be plagued by groupthink also. So I mean, if you look in particle physics and unified physics theory, there's a lot of wacky and cool ideas out there. A very small percentage pass through the sort of grant funding and institutional filters to get into CERN. So actually, if anything, I would pick the Perimeter Institute for physics as a better model, matching my own way of thinking, which is a privately funded physics research institute devoted into wacky out there physics ideas. Of course, my own ideas on unified physics are too wacky even for them in large part, but at least they're trying to explore the perimeter of knowledge, right? So I mean, I think there's a lesson there though in that when governments set up these sort of research institutes, they tend to double and triple down on the mainstream. So like if the US or European government were going to set up a CERN for AI, it would just be a government LLM institute because that's the mainstream thing right now. So then if I'm right that the path to AGI is out of that mainstream, all they're doing is doubling down on whatever big companies are doing. And this is just the general conservatism of government institutions, right? Because they tend to be some sort of biased weighted average of things, and breakthroughs tend to come from outliers rather than from a biased weighted average. So I would say, yeah, give us a dozen perimeter institutes for AGI with big hardware budgets, and then you might be talking, right? And Perimeter Institute, if I remember correctly, was just funded by some rich guy, right?
Wasn't it
Rather
Michael
than
Lazaridis who made a lot of his money from the RIM and BlackBerry devices?
yeah. That's right. That's right. It might be right. I'm not sure, but it sounds right.
It's
So
in
yeah,
Ontario,
I mean,
Waterloo, Canada, isn't it?
yeah. So let's get the billionaires of the world to step up and instead of just trying to send themselves and send pop stars into space or fight over who can build a bigger LLM, let's have them start perimeter institutes of AGI with massive hardware budgets. Well, hold on, that's what OpenAI was supposed to be, but look where that led us, right? So I mean, I think the challenge we have is that the institutions controlling resources on the planet, including billionaires whose mindsets are greatly tied in with the larger institutions. I mean, these are not oriented toward, you know, the intersection of radical innovation and compassionate global benefit. Like that intersection is very, very rare for reasons that are deep in the human psyche, I guess. I mean, because I've when I first started seriously trying to raise money for AGI in the early aughts. I mean, I had an AGI company in the late 90s, and we raised some money for that. That crashed and burned in the when the dot-com era crashed. And then I put a lot of deep thought into how to get AGI development funded. And this is around the phase when I met you, David. In that phase, in the early aughts, I talked to a lot of billionaires, and I was able to get access by being a moderately well-known AI scientist and entrepreneur. And I certainly didn't have family connections. I'm not and never have been a billionaire, right? But I managed to get access to people. I found them very interested in AGI even then, and completely unwilling to put any money into it, right? And now, so eventually I gave up on that route and just did entrepreneurial stuff, right? Which managed to get some funding into my AGI work. So now you do have billionaires taking AGI seriously, but they're doing it in a very billionaire-ish way that doesn't seem to doesn't seem to drive things optimally in the direction of human benefit, right? So I think we can't rely on UN, national governments, or billionaires to save us. I mean, if one of these forces pops up to help, that's great. But I've come to the conclusion it needs to be more grassroots. And I mean, you have Linux and open source software as a beautiful example that grassroots stuff in a broad sense can work. It can be very impactful. Like going back to the mobile phone space, like except for Apple, every phone is essentially every phone is running on Linux, which is open source software. Vast majority of internet servers are running on Linux, which is open source software, including Azure is mostly Linux now, right? So I mean, we see in the example of open source that grassroots can work to get real technologies built and rolled out, right? And that doesn't just mean it's radical out of the mainstream freaks working in their garage. I mean, IBM helped drive open source forward, Google helped drive open source forward, Microsoft is now, right? But they're doing it within this broader sort of decentralized network context. So I think that should come first. If AGI is rising in a ethos of decentralized participatory contribution, then when you do get national governments or billionaires funding perimeter institutes for AGI, they'll be more likely to do it in that context of this global decentralized AI network, which will be for the better. But it's a yeah, this comes back to we could get a beneficial AGI very soon if we really, really try. So now the thing is, going back to the beginning of this talk, now we're kind of trying to get to AGI, and we're kind of sort of even less trying to make it beneficial. If you look at the species level, right? And I mean, and that's doesn't make a lot of sense. But I mean, a lot of things about our species don't make a lot of sense.
So what should we be doing, those of us who are not billionaires? This is the question, the last one I'll take from the audience, from Kevin Alpha. What are the most critical actions individuals can take today to help develop compassionate, self-aware consciousness for these systems to flourish rather than just focusing on the AGI rather than BGI? What can we do?
I'm gonna partly punt on that question, but hopefully in a useful way. So I mean, of course, for those who are technically or entrepreneurially oriented, the answer is fairly clear. Like, let's put our time into beneficial AGI oriented projects, even if they have higher risk and don't pay as well as doing centralized or more questionably beneficial AI projects. And I mean, if you're a writer or artist or communicator and so forth, I mean, the answer is also kind of clear. I mean, these ideas and themes need to be gotten out there in ways that people can understand. And another ingredient here is, wait a minute, a lot more of us, if we put our minds to it, could be artists or AI developers or entrepreneurs than are right now. I mean, like vibe coding is kind of a silly term, but like you can make a lot of software without a lot of technical background now, right? It's never been easier to make a software demo of something using current AI tech to provide benefit and either put it out there or raise money for it. I mean, it's never been easier, to make your own podcast or do like David Wood is doing and get his friends to get up early on a Saturday morning and mouth off about the positive singularity to people halfway around the world. So I think with initiative, a lot of people can figure out ways to stretch their boundaries and their skill sets to do things that are directly valuable. I do think that's not a complete answer. I think there's a lot of other things that can be done to work toward a beneficial singularity, and it's also kind of a long tail of of things, which is different in different parts of the world and for different people. Like for one random example, like in Ethiopia and other countries in Africa, where we have an app called Layu, which is basically gathering speech-to-speech data from African languages that don't have translation models yet because there's not enough data. So I mean, we have an app, you just give it to people, they talk in it in their own language, and you gather that data, right? And so I mean, there something anyone could do is just go around and get more people to use that app on their phone, like physically go and get people to use it in their environment, like very easy things for people to do. That's specific to the cities in Africa where we've rolled that out. So there is a long tail of ways for people to help. And this is actually part of the reason that David and I and a bunch of others are pulling together something called the BGI Nexus, the Beneficial General Intelligence Nexus. So I think we do need, I don't want to call it a full-on social network, but in a sense, it's a social network. I mean, you need a network of people who are interested in contributing to a beneficial singularity, and you need to connect them with each other in a way that they can then share ideas and collectively conceive ideas about how to contribute. Because I mean, even if I gave the 50 best ideas on my mind based on the niches of the world that I'm involved in, it would probably be interesting, although I don't have time for it now. I got to go have breakfast, but it would probably be interesting. But I mean, you need 50,000, not 50, right? It's a big world, and there's so many different ways to contribute. So we will be publicizing more about the BGI Nexus sort of network initiative, and we'll have a BGI conference related to this theme in October in Istanbul, but of course, only a small percent of people are going to be able to travel to an event like that. So I think pulling together networks online is, if anything, more important.
So what people can do, they can talk to their favorite AI chatbot and say, how can I help Ben Goertzel achieve his goals? And if it's an intelligent AI chatbot, they will say, well, tell me about your talents, tell me about yourself, and maybe good ideas will come. Just before you have your breakfast, Ben, we haven't talked about transhumanism almost at all, despite me thinking that we would. Is that because you're actually just living transhumanist ideals and you don't need to talk about it formally anymore? Or is there something still
I
to be
mean, I
said
mean,
about
I
encouraging
was
people?
interested. Yeah, I mean, I was interested in the philosophy, sometimes labeled transhumanism, before I knew that label existed, right? And I guess I always had some ambivalence about having an ism, right? I mean, I grew up around Marxists who were deeply into Marxism. My dad was a Marxist sociology professor, and he was eventually kicked out of that tribe for not being Marxist enough, although he did think Marx was an interesting thinker. He thought he was right on many things, wrong on something. So I guess through that experience, I grew up not liking isms very, very much. I'm not that tribalist, right? So, I mean, transhumanism, I agree with every core idea associated with transhumanism, but labeling it that seems to set up a false dichotomy of transhumanism versus humanism, which is not what the vast majority of transhumanisms want. Actually, I mean, most transhumanisms love humans and want to be humans, and they want to have more humanity and more human life. They just think that, fully realizing your humanity involves going beyond how you previously conceived your humanity into new ways of conceiving your humanity, right? And this is along the lines of what my friend Weaver referred to as open-ended intelligence, which is how biological and digital intelligences maintain their boundaries, they individuate, and they self-transcend. They grow into new things they couldn't have conceived before, right? And so I think transhumanism has always been obvious to me since I discovered science fiction at age like three or four or something, right? I mean, it seemed obvious we're going to invent new technologies. We should use them to improve our brains and our bodies and make new ways of living and experiencing, make new kinds of minds to interact with. I'm unsure at this point how valuable it is to call out transhumanism as a distinct philosophy. I'm not saying it's bad, but I'm not sure how useful it is because what we've seen in the last couple of decades, like since I've been working with Humanity Plus, we've seen almost all of the core ideas of transhumanism become mainstream without the meme of transhumanism becoming mainstream or popular, right? So, in a sense, the transhumanist community has succeeded incredibly well at promoting its ideas and propagating its ideas into the mainstream of government and corporate world, but it has not succeeded in propagating the sort of official ideology of transhumanism. And I think because of that, I've kind of implicitly given up on using that label very often. I mean, not that I'm allergic to it or I'm a transhumanism denialist or something. It's just it doesn't seem to help to communicate. Like for most people, it's easier to communicate about AGI, super longevity, nanotech, and space exploration and body modification. And they'll be like, yeah, 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 yeah. But then communicating about transhumanism turns more people off than the collection of beliefs that transhumanism actually is, right? So that I mean that's annoying. It's just not the battle I've chosen to fight. Now, I sort of fought a battle with AGI as a term and concept and won, right? Like when I first introduced the term AGI, it was out of the mainstream and most people didn't like it. And then mostly through Shane Legg, who worked for me in the 90s in DeepMind, he kind of implanted that into the mainstream, right? So, I mean, terms can be out of fashion and then in fashion, and that's part of cultural evolution. But I mean, we are certainly living a transhumanist trajectory right now, right? I mean, clearly, you know, most normies will now accept that super longevity and chips implanted in the brain are viable things to happen within decades and AGI maybe within years. And there are industries that are now explicitly working toward these things with non-trivial amounts of money, even if it's not the main focus of our society, right? So we're totally living on a transhumanist trajectory, even if it's not commonly labeled as such.
Ben, your answers are all fascinating and they raise lots of further ideas, which I'm sure will be explored another day. I'll say a few words to the audience in a minute, but for now, I just want to thank you, Ben, very much for cutting into all your other activities, especially on a Saturday morning. And I look
Yeah,
forward to more with the BGI
thanks a lot.
Nexus and other things. Yeah.
Thanks a lot for organizing this. And yeah, we will keep the conversation going. And yeah, thanks everyone for listening and for your questions.